Tuesday, August 8th, 2023, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. It's very good to see people waking up about CBDCs. Nigel Farage, he's been talking about CBDCs for months. I said that, in my opinion, was one of the reasons they debanked him. The bankers, they know he's woken up to the insidious nature of CBDC. CBDC is like the final culmination for the international bankers for going from a monetary system that was public, where people use gold and silver coinage, and then they graduated, of course, not in a good way after World War I and World War II, to a system where we accepted paper and base metal coins. And now, of course, we have seen over the last 20 years the move to debit and credit cards, to online banking, and now they want to take us completely away from cash and coins and take us into a cashless CBDC society. And before we look further, it's not only encouraging that people like Nigel Farage and GB News, and they're going after GB News, the powers that be, but also someone like Phil Mickelson. Who is Phil Mickelson? Well, he's a very famous and successful golfer, and I was watching this video earlier today, and this is what he said. He was playing a match against Bryson DeChambeau and a couple of other guys, and they were setting their bets, and listen to him.
And when you're closed out, you can press for half.
Not the full?
Not the full.
Okay.
So you got to win the match to win. Yeah, and if you want, what we'll do is we'll go 28. If you shoot 28 best ball, it's double.
Perfect. I love that.
Okay.
That sounds
good.
Or
better, 28 or better.
He's played in a lot more of these sorts of things, so he knows how to make a deal that works in his favor.
You know, I actually max it at that. I don't ever play for more because I always want to keep it friendly.
That's right.
Just so you know, Camo and I, we don't do Venmo, PayPal, any of that bullshit. Like
straight cash.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
So yeah, I know a little bit about Phil Mickelson. Of course, he's won 3 Masters, 2 PGA Championships, and the British Open. Unfortunately for him, he hasn't won a US Open. That's the only major that's not in his portfolio, so to speak. I think he's finished second like 6 times. But I remember reading an article about him, and he said that he marks with one of these. That's a Morgan dollar, a silver dollar. And the reason he does mark his ball on the green with that is that it was his father's coin. I think his grandfather was an immigrant, and he started working very early, and that was the first money that he earned. So I think Phil Mickelson knows about the nature of money, maybe, who knows. So let's get back to the head of the snake. Why is the Bank for International Settlements the head of the snake? And many people, up until recently, had never heard of the Bank for International Settlements. It's marketed by the powers that be as an innocent bank that regulates international banks, the too big to fail banks here in the UK or in Europe or in the US or Japan, that is just there to help people along. Well, I have something to tell you that could change your mind about that. The first thing that I'm going to recommend you do, if you haven't, because I always recommend books here, is to read Tower of Basel, The Shadowy History of the Secret Bank That Runs the World by Adam Lebor. So there you go. I recommend you read this, and you find out everything you need to know about the Bank for International Settlements. And he even interviewed central bankers who worked at the BIS. And how does the BIS work? When was it created? Well, it was created through an international treaty in 1930. It was related to the League of Nations. It was supposed to help settle the war reparations debt that Germany had after World War One. So hence the name Bank for International Settlements. And the U.S. never, how can I say, was part of this officially, like the Federal Reserve. And I think it's because the U.S. never joined the League of Nations. But as you can see here in the BIS's constituent charter for of the Bank for International Settlements from 1930, it says who owns the BIS. So let's go through it. And this I got this document from the BIS website. Whereas the powers signatory to the Hague Agreement of January 1930 have adopted a plan which contemplates the founding by central banks of Belgium, France, Germany, Great Britain, Italy, and Japan, and by a financial institution of the United States of America of an international bank to be called the Bank for International Settlements. And one thing I would say about those central banks at the time, they were all privately owned, and they might have become public since then. But the international bankers, the people who own the big Wall Street bank or the too big to fail banks, have you ever wonder why they're too big to fail? Well, because they're in bed with the BIS and the central banks. But let's see which American banks own the BIS and why the talk of the BIS trying to regulate the banks is just like doesn't make any sense, right? It's not really regulation that's going to benefit you. And we're going to come to CBDCs in a moment, why the BIS is so important. And whereas the said central banks and the banking group, including Messrs. JP Morgan and Company of New York, the First National Bank of New York, the First National Bank of Chicago, have undertaken to found the said bank and have guaranteed or arranged for the guarantee of the subscription of its authorized capital amounting to 500 million Swiss francs, equal to 145,161,290.3 grams of fine gold. That's what money is, and they know it. Divided into 200,000 shares. So there you go. That's who owns the BIS. And they have a diplomatic immunity. As I said, it's like a country. It was created by an international treaty. So what does that mean in terms of the central bankers? Well, the central bankers, and by that I mean at the Federal Reserve, at the ECB, Bank of England, and all the other minor central banks in Europe, minor to the ECB, the Bank of Japan, they go to Basel every other month and they travel there with a diplomatic passport. Can you imagine having a BIS passport? Maybe that's something that the mainstream press could ask Jay Powell at one of his press conferences. Could you show us your BIS passport? So what that means is that they travel freely with documents they don't have to show anyone. And in my opinion, they are coordinating the CBDC agenda. And the other thing that the BIS does, it's called the Bank for the Central Bankers. And I have a story from when I sold my last house. We had it on the market, and we had viewers. And one of the viewers was actually someone who was coming back. He told us, we lived in Basel, and we're coming back to London. And I said, you didn't work for the BIS, did you? And he said, I did. He said, I was seconded from the Bank of England, which means the Bank of England sent him there to work there and pay his salary at the BIS. So they're all in it together, these bankers. And why is it so important for CBDCs to be coordinated from not even another country? It is another country. It's not Switzerland. It's the BIS. Well, because I don't think national parliaments, if people knew what CBDCs are about, and I think they're waking up to it, especially Nigel Farage. I have to give him credit for that. I think back in February, he did an interview with someone on GB News, and he said that CBDCs in a cashless society would be really a road to tyranny, and I agree with him. Don't agree with him on everything he says. And yeah, you couldn't do it through national government. So the way they do it is through the regulatory regime that's set by people who are not even elected by us, people who regulate our big banks from an independent sovereign bank owned by the bankers. And I'm not like making this up. I'm going to put a link to this constituent charter for you below in the description. So you've probably seen the managing director of the BIS. Is he really in charge? No, he's just a figurehead, but he even has a BIS podcast. If you go on Twitter, they're talking a lot about CBDC. And I think, they are the ones behind it. And without them coordinating with all the other central banks and actually drawing up all the rules and all the technology outside any, let's say, domestic sovereign control from the public here in the UK or whatever other country, they're going to get this through. So this is why we need to expose the Bank for International Settlements, because if we do that, we get to the head of the snake. I think it would be a lot harder for them to implement this. So what can we do? Well, what we can do is tell our politicians or tell Nigel Farage that the Bank of England needs to sell its shares in the BIS, that it needs to stop dealing with the BIS, that anyone that works for the Bank of England has to cut contacts with the BIS, and that we have to have our own banking rules created in England or in the UK and not in the BIS. It's not even in Switzerland. So that's why it's so important to know your enemy. There's the old saying by the Chinese philosopher Sun Tzu, and he says, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, and this is the enemy, the BIS, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. That means you're going to go nowhere. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. So there you go. BIS, head of the CBDC snake. And I think the other deception of the BIS and the international bankers are the digital currencies, the cryptocurrencies. I think that's been like a distraction, something that has helped them develop the CBDC, and they've done it kind of for free. And they kickstart that with Bitcoin. That's my view. I never like something where you don't know who created it. We're told it's Satoshi Nakamoto. But there are many people who've done research, and it goes back, the Bitcoin white paper goes back to MIT. It goes back to Jeffrey Epstein. So the bankers are clever, and they use deception. And yes, I'm not arguing that a lot of people haven't made a lot of money from being cryptos and Bitcoin, but they've helped create the infrastructure for CBDCs for the central bankers, and the central bankers haven't had to spend any money. It's all been done. I think that's a big deception. That will be coming out as well. You might not agree with me on that, but I'm going to recommend that you watch some of my videos that I've done about CBDC, especially the one I did with Clive Thompson. That was my first interview with him. I highly recommend that video back in November last year. It's got almost 600,000 views. And just search through my YouTube channel for CBDC and search for BIS videos as well. And I'm going to try to find some links. I don't know if there's a free PDF for this book, but I highly recommend it. And one of the things that happened during World War II is that the BIS was operating in Basel. And guess who was doing business in the BIS with each other? Well, not only the Allied countries fighting the Axis countries, but also the Axis countries. So I think the Norwegians, after World War II, at the Bretton Woods meeting, they wanted to abolish the BIS because they found out that both sides were trading and dealing with each other. But guess who vetoed that idea? Well, it was the representative of Great Britain, Lord Keynes, John Maynard Keynes, the guy who basically created this socialist Keynesian fiat currency nightmare. While he planted the seeds for it, some people would argue that he didn't foresee things becoming as they have. But I think he was very much aware of what was going on, and he was a pawn of the bankers. I mean, why wouldn't you want to abolish a bank that dealt with the enemy during World War II? It was supposed to be fighting for freedom and democracy, right? So there you go. The head of the snake is in Basel, Switzerland. It's not Swiss. It's supranational. It's the BIS. Make sure you subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet. Make sure you share this video far and wide. We want people to wake up and to know who their true enemies are.